should probably kick. Thank you. I don't know
So
who, did you do that?
I did that. Yeah, I'm going to record it.
Thank you. Because I would have forgotten. So
Yeah.
appreciate it. All right, gang. Let's kick it off. As I said, I'm going to kick this off for all of 10 seconds. I'm happy and proud and pleased to introduce William Taggart, author of Fixing America, and also an avid Forward Party member and member of our state executive committee here in the state of Texas. He's going to do a presentation, as he said, for about 40 minutes of his findings, and then we can follow up with 20 minutes of Q&A or so. So, William, off to you.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to start us off with two quotes. The first is an anonymous Greek proverb. Society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in. That's the kind of politicians you want, the kind of politicians who are working for your children or for your grandchildren. Unfortunately, the second quote from Thomas Salvo is the politicians that we tend to get, which is they are trying to solve their own problems, of which getting elected and reelected is number one and number two. Whatever is number three is far behind. So that's the reality of what we're dealing with. So who am I and why should you listen to me? Can we get everybody on mute? Okay. So who am I and why should you listen to me? So I was 16 years as a consulting engineer, mainly in oil and gas. I was then 16 years with a mid-sized oil company as a project manager and a subject matter expert. For the last 4 years, I've been a consultant to industry and I've been developing long duration energy storage for the electrical grid. Now, the things you need to understand about my career is it was two main focuses. One, leading very large project teams. And when you're leading a large project team, you have an objective. That project is being built to do something, and that something has economic value. And based on that economic value, you've been given a budget and been given a pot of money, and you have a schedule which had to go into calculating out the economic value. Now, I hate the terms think outside the box because that project has a box and it's defined by what it needs to do, the money you've been given, and the schedule you have, and you don't want to break the box. So, learning to compromise, learning to work within the boundaries is something you learn very early on. The other half of my career, I was called on to investigate events. And in that regard, you've got to do what's called a root cause analysis. And you're looking to determine what happened, what was the real reason that caused the event, and what can we do to prevent those events in the future. And that involves going in, finding the data, doing the research. So when somebody says do your own research, I've done that. I've been trained to do it. So that's what started everything. Now, how this whole effort got started was in 2020, I was running a very large oil and gas project. Got it through the worst of COVID, and I was just burnt out. I was done. So I quit and I walked away from the oil industry. And before I could go back, before I could even think about doing consulting for the industry, I had to get something resolved, and that was climate change. So when you're in oil and gas, you're told two things. You're told either you're burning the planet down or climate change is a hoax. And I needed to wrap my mind around that and understand it. So I figured out I could determine if climate change exists by subtracting the Tmax average. Now, the National Weather Service records all the temperature data throughout the United States and, in fact, the world. And you can go in there and you can query it and you can get what's called Tmax average, Tmax for a day. And that's the highest temperature for a day at that weather station. And if you collect all that data, you can then figure out what is the Tmax average, the maximum temperature average between 1901 and 1990, and the maximum temperature average from 2011 to 2020. And this is Brazoria County, Texas. So I pulled all the data, I ran the numbers, and I figured out what Brazoria County, Texas was. And you can see the Tmax average shifts all around and it moves around a lot. Now, this is what engineers and scientists would call as a noisy signal. So we're going to take the average of this noisy signal to see what's going on. And what you get is from 1901 to 1990, you get 79 degrees Fahrenheit. From 2011 to 2020, you get 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're seeing a 1 degree Fahrenheit change. Now, the 20-year gap right here, I skipped over to give us some separation so we could see that difference easier. So once I'd done this, I said, okay, let me do 25, I picked 25 counties at random. Now, the problem was So one county I did was Galveston. And Galveston came back with like 4 degrees of heating. And I said, wait a minute, this is ridiculous. It's next to Brazoria. How can I be getting 4 degrees of heating next to Brazoria when Brazoria only has one? And it turned out Galveston was missing a whole lot of data in the 1930s. Some hurricanes wiped out the temperature stations and the weather stations, and they weren't recording data in the 30s. So I said, okay. So I started making some rules. The rule was you had to have 77 years minimum of valid data from 1901 to 1990 to be counted as a valid county. Brazoria County is missing 4 years, 1901, 1906, 1907, and 1947, according to the rules I set up. So I said, okay, I started out with 25 counties, and I ended up with 19 that actually made the data cut. And I got numbers all over the place. And I went, what the heck is going on here? So I said, okay, when you get this in industry, what it means is you're missing something. There's some other aspect of this that you're not looking at. And sure enough, once I added in population density, the data started to make a lot more sense. The urban areas, which are more than 500 people per square mile, showed consistently a climate change. The rural areas, which urban, rural, and ultra rural are how the U.S. Census Bureau designates counties. I really think rural should be suburban and ultra rural should be rural, but that's what the U.S. Census Bureau does. So anyway, the rural counties, which is 500 people to 100 people per square mile, they showed in between. And then it was the ultra rural counties, less than 100 people per square mile, where some of them showed cooling. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. Now, for the county showing cooling, Terrebonne Parish, Louisiana is on the Gulf Coast, and it is like half water due to the bayous and the lakes and the swamps in it. Some of these other counties that showed cooling were near the Dust Bowl events of the 1930s. So they had very high temperatures during the 1930s. So I said, okay, this is starting to make sense to me. So I said, okay, let's do 7 states completely, every county within the 7 states. So I did 7 states: California, Massachusetts, Texas, Ohio, Louisiana, Missouri, and Arkansas. And I got a lot of variation. So again, you're looking at this going, what's going on here? So to see what was going on, I then widened the data and said, okay, I'll use any county that's got more than 50 years of data between 1901 and 1990. The numbers changed slightly, but it still showed the same pattern. California, Massachusetts show very clear climate change. Louisiana, Missouri, and Arkansas don't. But then if you look at the gross domestic product per person, a measurement of how the economy is working in these areas, California, Massachusetts have almost twice the GDP per person as Arkansas. And they've got about 20,000 more than Texas and more than Ohio and more than Louisiana and Missouri. So I was starting to see that this has a relationship. But the thing that really jumped out at me was climate change is not uniform. It varies depending on the area. So when you ask why do blue states believe so strongly in climate change, they're seeing it. And why do red states don't believe in climate change? Because they're not seeing it as much as the blue states. So anyway, the book had to go to the publisher middle of 2023. I was a little worried because nobody else was talking about this. And then lo and behold, Wired Magazine published this article in September 2023 talking about the warming hole. But what they're really saying is they were asking the question, why is the central United States weirdly cool compared to the rest of the country? And I said, okay, they're seeing what I'm seeing. So we are on the same page. So the short answer is we are not burning the planet down. The red line is from a climate change advocate. The black line is the average raw National Weather Service data. And I called these people up. I spoke with their director and I said, okay, I'm not showing the same data as you are in the 1900 to 1940 range. What's going on? And they said, oh, yeah, we have a filtering algorithm that we use. Okay, well, I'm an engineer. I've done control system analysis and control system work. I'm familiar with filtering algorithms. Let me see your filtering algorithm. Oh, no, can't do that. It's proprietary. I said, okay. So, what I've done on my website for the book, there's a bar at the top, and in that bar is a button called Data. And if you pick on Data, you will go to this page and you can see all the data tables that I made to do the book. So, I'm willing to share all my work with you guys, unlike the climate change advocate who wouldn't share anything. All right. Now, while I say we're not burning the planet down, I do think we should be worried. So that Brazoria County average is okay. The average days per year above 90 degrees Fahrenheit from 1901 to 1990, it averaged 78 days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. From 2011 to 2023, we averaged 90 days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. That's an extra 12 days of your air conditioner working hard. That's an extra 12 days of us seeing these high temperatures. So we are seeing climate change, and we should be a little bit worried because we're seeing definitely a ramping up going on. So the thing I would like to make a point of is we are being told that climate change is the oil companies are the bad guys. They're releasing lots of CO2. The good guys are the environmentalists, and they're going to reduce our fossil fuel use. That's a simple answer. And in my research, I found that there's other factors involved that we're not talking about. So rather than a simple but wrong answer, I want to give you something a little bit more complex. So the slightly more complex equation for climate change. It's energy per person. How much CO2 are you releasing? How much heat are you generating? How much trash are you generating? Times the number of people is your climate change impact. Okay? For the United States since 1960, and I start in 1960 because I've got good data in 1960. If I go farther back in 1950, 1940, the data is less good. So I wanted to start from a solid point. And if you look in 1960, we were using about 243 million BTUs per person. A BTU is a British thermal unit, and it's a measurement of heat, measurement of energy. In 2023, we're using 280 million BTUs per person on average. So that's a 15% increase. But for the United States, our population in 1960 was 179 million. By 2023, we're up to 337 million. That's a 91% increase. So overall, we've had a 120% increase in our climate change impact, but the majority of that has come from population increase. If you look at the world in 1960, the world average was 45 million BTUs per person. It's now up to 75 million BTUs per person. You got to realize that people living in Africa, India, China, they use a lot less energy per person than the US does. In fact, we're one of the big energy users. But their energy usage has increased by 67%. You look at the world population, however, in 1960 it was 3 billion people. Now we're over 8 billion people. So that's a 166% increase. So the world climate change impact has gone up by 344% since 1960. And the majority of it, again, is being driven by population increase. But you don't hear anybody talking about population increase. You don't hear anybody talking about the massive increase of trash and stuff. We are focusing on CO2, and I think we're overly focusing on it. Okay. So let me give you a practical reason for not banning drilling. Okay. If you ban drilling, the U.S. gets about 9 million barrels a day out of the shale wells. The shale wells have a very high decline rate. So the shale well is going to make less oil tomorrow than it made today. So if you stop drilling new wells, within 18 months, you've lost 50% of your production. You're down almost 5 million barrels a day. That's going to cause a problem. But even more so, you need to look at natural gas. If you stop drilling in natural gas wells, it drops off by 30% almost in 1 year. Now, the reason I focus more on natural gas is oil, we can ship oil around, it's sold on the international market. Natural gas is a little different. It's hard for us to bring in a lot of natural gas supplies suddenly. So if we stop drilling, we're going to be down 25 billion cubic feet per day of natural gas within a year. And that would have a serious energy impact. Think about a winter storm Uri every day, not having enough energy to run all our electrical power plants and do everything we need to do. All right, but let me give you a practical reason for an energy transition. So back in 1950, there was a man named Hubert, and he was a geologist for Shell Oil. And he released a paper in 1950s where he predicted that the U.S. domestic onshore oil production would peak in 1970. It was called Hubert's Peak. And it happened. It happened, and he predicted it accurately. So U.S. domestic production in onshore peaked in the 1970s and then went into decline. Now, the rules have changed. Hubert didn't know about shale production. If you'd gone into Shell Oil's building in the 1950s and said you wanted to drill down a mile, turn the drill bit and drill out 4 miles, they'd have laughed you out of the building. It was just not feasible in the 1950s. Shale has changed everything. But nobody seems to be thinking about when will shale peak and when will it go into decline. So if you look at the Permian and specifically the Midland Basin, on the left is what's been drilled, on the right, what's left to be drilled. and it's broken into five color codes. Tier 1, which is the best acreage, the thickest acreage, the one with the most oil per acre. Then goes down to Tier 5, which is the lowest amount of oil per acres. We've about drilled out the Tier 1 acreage. I'm being told there's about 1 year left at the present rates of drilling. Once you have drilled out the best acreage, you've got to drill more of the lower quality acreage to keep your production rates up. This invokes what's called the Red Queen effect in the industry. And the Red Queen is from Lewis and Carroll's book, where Alice asked the Red Queen, how are you doing? And the Red Queen responds, I'm running as fast as I can just to stay where I'm at. When you start to get into the point where you've used up your Tier 1 acreage and you're down into the Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4 stuff, you've got to be drilling more wells faster to keep production rates the same because of the steep decline rates of the shale wells. So that's what the industry is fearing. I'm talking with oil and gas CEOs. They're thinking we are 3 to 8 years from the Permian peaking, and a lot of them are predicting 4 to 5 years. Now, you got to remember the Permian in 2014, 10 years ago, was producing 1.5 million barrels per day. It's increased to 6 million barrels a day. But a lot of people are still thinking that somehow we're going to drive that even higher to 9 million barrels today. And the only problem is the oil CEOs are not thinking that way. They are thinking it's going to peak in that time. Now, to me, the more important thing to talk about in this regard is natural gas. This is the Haynesville Shale, which is between Texas and Louisiana, East Texas, North Louisiana. The color codes are the thickness, the porosity thickness. So the red area is the best area to drill. It's going to have the most natural gas per acre. The blue area is going to have the lowest natural gas per acre. Now, what I want to talk about is proven reserves versus possible reserves. So let me explain what that means. So this is proven reserves. The roads have been laid, the water mains are in place, the sewer lines are there. They're going to build houses here. If you're a realtor, you can pretty much guarantee you're going to be selling houses in this neighborhood at some point. That's proven reserves, a 90% chance of it happening. This is possible reserves. There's no roads, there's no sewage lines, there's no water lines. Maybe they'll develop it at some point, maybe they won't. Possible reserves has only a 10% chance of happening. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is a lot of people are throwing out possible reserve numbers to say, oh, we don't need to do anything. We have lots and lots of reserves. But these possible reserve numbers only have a 10% chance of happening. So let's go back and look at the Haynesville. This curve was released in 2023. It charts as you pull more natural gas, measured in trillion cubic feet of natural gas, as you pull more out of the Haynesville, the price necessary to develop the remaining acreage goes up. So this is where we are now. The chart was released in 2023. Now at the beginning of 2025, we're in this area. And natural gas prices are running over $3. They averaged $4 in January. We're running about $3.50 right now in February for natural gas. Because of the way the Haynesville operates, I do not expect to see natural gas prices go lower than $3. Because if they do, Haynesville drillers up in the Marcellus and the Utica and Pennsylvania and West Virginia will shut down because they can't make money at that lower natural gas price. Now, this is proven reserves, 120 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. As we get up to that 120 level, though, you need like $8, $9, $10 natural gas to develop those remaining reserves. This is the possible reserves for the Haynesville, 200 TCF, 200 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. We cannot economically get there with the present technology. Now, they'll talk about it, they'll call it technically recoverable. We could drill it, but the problem is you can't economically recover it. And the thing you got to realize is national proven reserves for natural gas are 700 trillion cubic feet. We burn 45 trillion cubic feet per year. The possible reserve number is out at 4,000 trillion cubic feet. So if we have a technological breakthrough, we could go beyond the 700, but getting all the way up to 4,000, I just don't think is possible. So we've got to focus on how much gas we know we have rather than talking about these possible numbers that people keep throwing out as a justification to keep doing what we're doing. All right, so that led into lots of other topics. I didn't start out to write a book. I started out just to answer questions for myself. And eventually I dug into so many topics that I turned to my wife and I said, this needs to be a book. All right, so let's talk about my big fear, which is national debt. So this is the national debt chart. It starts in 1921. We've just fought World War I. The national debt stands at 40% to gross domestic product. And as we go along, we pay it down until we get to 1929. 1929 is the great stock market crash. Is the great stock market crash. With the crash, we went into the Great Depression. The economy crashed. The debt to GDP ratio went up to 50%. The government was borrowing money. We get through the Great Depression, and then World War II starts. The US government borrows a lot of money to fight World War II, and we go up to a massive debt of $280 billion, which was over 120% of our gross domestic product. In the late 40s, early 1950s, we were paying the debt down, the economy was growing, and it all came down to the 1980s where our debt to GDP ratio had dropped down to almost 30%. And then we had the Reagan tax cuts. Now we're running up bigger debt. The economy is still growing, but the debt to GDP ratio goes up. And by the end of Reagan's term, it's up to 50%. We then had the Bush tax cuts in 2001. We had the Great Recession of the mortgage crisis in 2008. We had the Trump tax cuts in 2017, and then we had COVID. And now we reach our total debt of over $36 trillion. We're over 120% debt compared to GDP. All right. So the old motto is if you're in a hole, stop digging. So the obvious answer is we need to balance the budget and stop running deficits. So we're going to talk about what the budget looks like. We're going to use the numbers from 2023. The 2024 numbers are still being locked down, so we're going to use the 2023 numbers because they're solid. So Social Security is 1.4 trillion, Medicare is $1 trillion. And that's offset by payroll taxes, which is only $1.6 trillion. You're already almost $700 billion in the hole. Now, the thing you have to understand is when Social Security started out, it was 8 workers to 1 retiree. We're now down to 3 workers to 1 retiree because people are living longer, more people are retiring. So that ratio of workers to retiree has shifted. And that's due to demographics, purely demographics. The problem is they predict in the future it's going to get down to 2 workers per 1 retiree. And that's caused Medicare and Social Security to get out of sync. Now, we also have Medicaid, income security, which is unemployment insurance. We have pensions for veterans and for federal employees. We've got other mandatory spending. This is all spending that has been directed by a law by Congress that says you will spend this money. All right. To offset this, we've got individual income tax, a little over $2 trillion, corporate income tax at $4.4 trillion, and other taxes that they barely offset all the mandatory spending. But we're not done yet with spending. There's the interest on the debt. In 2023, it was $660 billion. It is over $1 trillion now of payments on the national debt. Add in the military budget of $800 billion, which was the budget for 2023, and add in the other discretionary spending. The other discretionary spending is where all the focus is right now. That's the Department of Education, Department of State, including USAID, Department of Energy, and the money that we send to Ukraine. And that is only those areas right there. Now you got to realize in 2023, we were $1.7 trillion of deficit. You're not going to be able to make enough cuts to balance the budget, especially when you've got Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security that have tripled in the last 20 years. So if you can't balance the budget with cuts, you got to start looking at income. And that means talking about taxes. So this chart has all the tax tables from all the years from 1921 to now. All those little gray lines are different tax tables. And what I've done is I've taken each tax table, adjusted for inflation so that they all lay out together. The tax table in the blue line is 1946. So if you made $4,000 in 1946, that's equal to $51,000 now. And that's what I've done is I've laid those tax lines so that they equal present day dollars. So let's start with the blue line. 1946, President Truman is in office. National debt's $280 billion. The ratio of debt to gross domestic product is 118%. Social Security tax, no Medicare at the time, was only 1%. And I've added that 1% to the income tax rate to draw the blue line. Now let's look at the red line. 2024 tax table, $35 trillion of debt and climbing. Again, national debt to gross domestic product is 120%. We have more debt than we have gross domestic product, which is a measurement of our economy. The Social Security Medicare tax is 7.65%. That 7.65% is included in that red line. Now, if you are a contractor, an independent contractor, part of the gig economy, drive for Lyft, drive for Uber, you have to pay an additional 7.65% because you're an independent contractor and you have to pay the whole Medicare Social Security tax. That's not included in this red line. So if you're an independent contractor, your red line's even higher. Now, when you look at that region, you got to understand this is the bottom 50% of the population in that under $90,000 range. And for them, their tax rates are almost the same as what their grandparents paid in 1946. If you're in the 50th to 90th percentile, the middle class, some of y'all are paying tax rates that are pretty much the same as your grandparents paid. Some of y'all have gotten a little bit of a break from what the grandparents paid. But if you're in that 90th to 99th percentile, that upper 10%, you've had a massive tax break. And especially if you consider the fact if you're in that top 1% of the American tax earners, you've got a massive tax break that you've seen from what your grandparents used to pay. And that change in taxes has had a consequence. So this chart shows you the wealth of America, like a pie chart. And the net worth of America has changed since 1989. The top 1% have increased their share of the American pie by 7.6%. And that has come mainly from the middle class, the 50th to 90th percentile. If we're going to talk about taxing people, we need to talk about taxing the top 1% because that's where the money is. That's where the excess money is. So if we're going to have that conversation, we've got to have it in this manner. Anyway, all right, enough about taxes. I'm going to stop depressing y'all. Well, Neil, I'll talk about something completely different. All right, so about 5 years ago, this little hot water kettle decided to break. The light still turned on. I could hear the relay in the base clicking, but it wouldn't heat up the hot water. Now, most people would just go out and buy a new kettle. I mean, the thing's only $30. Well, I'm not most people. I've got tools in the garage. Within about 15 minutes, I had the thing disassembled and had found that there was a broken fuse. There was a little fuse next to the heating element in the base of the kettle. Now, if you take a fuse and you heat it up and cool it down, heat it up and cool it down, that's like taking a paper clip and bending it back and forth. Eventually, the paper clip breaks, and eventually the fuse broke as well after about 4 years of use. Well, the house has a circuit breaker that protects the circuit. There's a GFCI receptacle for the kitchen. Why do I have this fuse? I don't need it. So I took the fuse out, put the two wires together, closed everything up, and this kettle has worked fine for the last 5 years. This is an example of what's called designed obsolescence, where the manufacturer has made the product where it will fail at some point and you'll have to go buy a new one. Now, wouldn't it be nice if the manufacturer had to tell you how long this product was supposed to last? Wouldn't it be nice if you went in and could look at two different refrigerators and know, okay, that refrigerator's, they tell me it'll last for 10 years and this one will last for 20 years. And then you can make an educated decision on which product you wanted to buy. I mean, we all know the story of these old refrigerators that grandma used to have that are still running somewhere back in the garage that people use because those things have been built with such a big margin of safety, with such thicker parts, heavier duty stuff, they've just lasted forever. The other thing we got to talk about is, wouldn't it be nice if we had a nice big flag on the front of the package that told you who made the product, instead of having to look for the made in wherever wording somewhere on the box? What about on Amazon? What if you could have a button that you could say buy American, and that way you could more easily buy American products? And the last thing we need to talk about is making the packaging more recycling. 30% of our trash is packaging. America generates more trash per person than any other country. If you want to talk about climate change and about improving the environment, we need to talk about trash. Okay. So I volunteer for a group called Cycle. Cycle Houston is the website. We build bicycles and we have a deal where we go to the public elementary schools and the second grade students sign up. And what they sign up for is that they're going to improve their reading skills. And if they improve their reading skills and the teacher agrees the reading skills have been improved, they get a bicycle. So one year I went to the executive director and I said, listen, some of us, we want to build American bikes. Can we pay extra and buy some American bikes and build those instead of these bikes that are coming from overseas? And she says, great, you find the bikes, I'll buy them. I said, fabulous. I looked for months. Nobody makes 20-inch children's bikes in the US. They are all imported. If you put tariffs on kids' bikes, You are going to pay extra for them, and there is no U.S. industry that you're protecting, no U.S. industry that you're encouraging. We don't make children's bikes in this country anymore. Not only that, but 5% of our clothing is made in the US. 95% of our clothing is imported. If we hit it with tariffs, we're just going to pay extra for everything. Okay? So that was a point I wanted to make. Okay, let's talk about something near and dear to our hearts, ERCOT. So this is ERCOT's power usage last year. This is megawatt hours per day charted. You'll see we got the big spike in January from a freeze. We actually use more power over the day in a freeze than we do during the summer, because in the summer you have high electricity load during the day, but it goes down a lot at night. But during these freezes, we're using high electricity all the time. Now, we have a lot of variation. This is consumer demand driving this. This is the changing of the days and everything. The average was 1.26 million megawatt hours per day, which was up 4% from 2023. But we actually had a cooler summer and we used 3.5% less electricity during the summer. Now, the question is, this is the demand curve. How do we satisfy it? Well, first is nuclear. We have 5 gigawatts of nuclear in Texas. It was commissioned in 1988 through 1993. We haven't built any in the last 30 years. Now, it runs pretty solidly, and we get about 8.4% of our electricity from nuclear. This is solar. Solar varies a lot. We actually get twice as much solar during the summer than we do during the winter. And it's because of the way the angle of the sun in the sky. And solar actually supplied more than nuclear this year, 10.4%, which was up from the 7.3% last year. And then we have wind. Wind is super variable. It swings all over the place, but it gave us 24% of our electricity last year. Now, all this constantly changing demand, from the demand to the renewable supply, has to be supplied by something to pick up the difference between the renewables and the demand, and that's natural gas. There's a little blue line at the bottom. That's coal. We get about 12%, 6% of our electricity from coal, but natural gas is doing all the heavy lifting. We get 44% of our electricity from natural gas. And the natural gas is constantly changing to match that gap between demand and what the renewables are giving us. Okay, so let's look at a month. This is February, probably the easiest month for ERCOT. Demand doesn't swing very much, but you've still got a lot of variation in the solar and in the wind, and the natural gas has to be constantly changing its output to match up with that. This is August. This is the month that ERCOT fears. You're having a 30,000 megawatt swing between the top point in the day and the low point at night. Now, people talk about doing all of our electricity with nuclear. I don't think so. Nuclear power plants don't swing that well. Nuclear engineers are assuring me that the new power plants will be able to swing their output and all that. But even if it's technically feasible, it's not economically feasible, because if you build enough nuclear to supply the hottest point during the day, that means that nuclear power plant is only going to be utilized about 60% of the time because of the massive swing through power from day to night. If you build a nuclear power plant, you build it on economics of running 24/7. This destroys the economics. So nuclear is going to be a difficulty. But then so is going to be solar and wind. There's so much variation in the solar and the wind that you're going to have massive amounts of energy storage to make a solar or wind system work. I actually think a hybrid system is the best, using nuclear, solar, wind, and energy storage. Okay, but why am I worried about ERCOT? So we were talking about natural gas earlier. This is liquefied natural gas imports and exports. Our exports have shot up since 2015. Now, we still actually import a little bit of natural gas, and this is a funny little story. That's Boston. So New York has blocked the building of any new natural gas pipelines across New York State. Well, that means you can't get natural gas from Pennsylvania and West Virginia into New England. So what happens? Boston imports natural gas via liquefied natural gas, LNG. Now, there's a law called the Jones Act. It means you can only pick up a product in a U.S. port and take it to another U.S. port with a U.S. flagged vessel. There are no U.S. flagged natural gas carriers. They're all foreign ships. As a result, Boston gets its LNG from Trinidad, not from any U.S. supply. A fun little fact for you. Anyway, so LNG exports have been jumping up. The thing I'm worried about is in the next 4 years, we're going to double our LNG export capacity. We are building a lot of LNG export facilities, and we will go up with that. So we're building more natural gas power plants, we're building more LNG exports, and we're probably going to peak in natural gas production with the Permian and everything in the next 5 years or so. That should worry you. So the question is, what do we need in 20 years? So what does ERCOT need in 20 years? And more importantly, what does the US need in 20 years? So let me ask a basic question. Who is our geopolitical rival in the world? Who is our economic geopolitical rival? And the answer is fairly simple. It's China. So what are all three of these countries doing about building energy stuff right now? Realize if you need it in 20 years, you probably need to start building it now. And this is how the construction goes. I'm only going to talk about two numbers on this chart, the green and the red numbers. So nuclear. So the US has 95 gigawatts of nuclear. With the completion of the Vogtle power plant in Georgia, there are 0 nuclear power plants in construction in the US. China built 56 gigawatts in the last few years. They have 26 gigawatts of nuclear in construction. But then there's this other set of numbers, and that is for what's called pumped storage. So if you think of batteries, lithium ion batteries, as energy storage, they're more like energy closets. Pump storage is like an energy warehouse. These things store 20 to 30 hours of energy. They are massive facilities. It's two lakes on the side of a mountain. You pump the water to the upper lake to store electricity. You let it flow down to the lower lake to recover it. They are massive facilities. The U.S. built 23 gigawatts in the 70s, 80s, and 90s in conjunction with our nuclear power plants. Remember, a nuclear power plant likes to run 24/7. It likes to run flatline. So if the energy demand goes down during the night, you're going to have all this excess electricity. Where do you put it? You put it in these pump storage facilities, and then you bring it back during the day when you need it. So we built 23 gigawatts back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. We haven't built anything in the last 20 years. China has caught up and surpassed us in the last 20 years. They now have 50 gigawatts of pump storage, but they're building 89 gigawatts of pump storage. That will make it where their solar and their wind and their nuclear work better with their grid. So China is clearly going to try and build a grid that is less dependent on coal, natural gas, and oil, and more reliable on nuclear, solar, and wind. So that's where they're going. And I think we need to be asking, why aren't we going the same way? All right. So this original presentation was for the Texas Realtors Winter Meeting, and the big question I wanted to answer for them was, what do I think a Texas house will look like in 20 years? All right. So natural gas markets will be tight in the foreseeable future. I don't see natural gas going below $3, and in fact, I think it's going to slowly work its way up. So I know you love your gas ranges, but you need to start thinking about induction cooling, because I don't think you're going to like your gas range when it's $8 per million BTU for natural gas. The other technology I'm looking at, heat pump water heaters. Now, these guys are interesting. Instead of burning natural gas to heat the water, what they do is they take air, they pull the heat out of the air to put it into the water to heat the water, and their byproduct is cold air. I'll say that again. The byproduct is cold air. So living in Houston, I love this idea. Pump that into my house. It's like a second air conditioning unit, and it saves me money. Now, the other thing is heat pumps, I think, are going to become more common. And the other thing I'm looking at is what's called geothermal heat pumps. This is where you run tubing down underground in an area underground where it's constantly 70 degrees Fahrenheit. You circulate water through that region. So it lets you cool the house in the summer and it lets you heat the house in the winter. It costs a lot to install it, but it is extremely energy efficient. The other thing I think we're going to see is much better insulation. My house has 6-inch walls, and I am amazed at how much lower my electric bill is than my friends who have 4-inch thick walls. The other thing is, I think oil markets are going to get tighter. As a result, we can plan on more electric vehicles. Houses with electric charging stations are going to become a little bit of a plus. We're going to see more mass transit, trains and buses. They're building, this train right here is being built in Florida. They are building a functioning high-speed rail in Florida. And we're going to see more mixed development. Walk to work, walk to restaurants, an area where you've got residential, entertainment, retail, and offices all in one area. I saw a lot of this when I was living in Europe for a short while. Okay, so let's talk about something else. Let's talk about misinformation. Okay, misinformation is also known as propaganda, and it's all about convincing people to do your bidding. Most likely the first caveman was tried to convince his neighbors he was the best guy to lead the tribe. So that's probably our first example of misinformation. But we're now seeing a lot of it now. The 1800 election between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams had a lot of misinformation. They were lying, they were throwing mud at each other. It was a mess, but it was on hand written, hand cranked newspapers. So it didn't go far. Now, in this modern era with social media and everything, lies can travel incredibly fast. Okay. So we need to have a solution to this. And the first thing we've got to understand is social media is not free speech. A company owns the social media platform and pays for the computers that it runs on. If you can't trust the company, you can't trust the platform. Social media companies need to verify that people are real people and not bots. If someone says they're Carol in El Paso, you need to be able to believe it that Carol does actually live in El Paso and she's not a computerized thing located in China or Russia or somewhere else. And also, people need to have the ability to flag posts as fake and misinformation, and for social media to investigate and respond accordingly. And last of all, we need to be smarter consumers of information. There was a big thing that was running around where the Pope was going to endorse Trump in 2016. The Pope was never going to endorse Trump. Okay, we need to be a little bit smarter about that and not pass along these things that are obviously false. But we also need to understand what our own limitations are. Now, the point of this is not to discuss whether an airplane on a conveyor belt takes off or not. The point of this is to discuss that the LinkedIn post has been deleted and was deleted a long time ago, and thankfully for that, because the replies and the responses had gotten really ugly. You had people with no technical information at all arguing with pilots and aerospace engineers about whether the plane could take off or not. These people had no technical knowledge, but they were willing to double down, get very ugly in the replies. And the pilots and the engineers were coming back with just as much heat. And that's why the whole LinkedIn post got deleted. And the thing we got to realize is in doing some research for this, I found this quote from 1847. I honestly believe it is better to know nothing than to know what ain't so. So this has been a problem that's been around for a long time. We have a belief, we think it's true. We have nothing to prove that it's true, but we double down and argue with people, demanding that they believe that what we're saying is true when we really don't know. Okay? So before you respond or repost or pass along information that you think is true, find out really whether it's true or not. And I'll give you all an example for this. There were a couple chapters in the book where I thought for sure, yeah, the answer's off in that direction. I'll end up over there. I'll do the research, and that's where I'll end up. And I would do the research, look at the history, look at the data, do all the analysis, and I'd end up somewhere completely different. And that surprised me. And it showed that even I had mistaken beliefs, and that when challenged, I had to adjust my view because the data and the history did not support it. So, what I'm getting at point here is you can watch slick videos on YouTube claiming that the earth is flat, or you can watch a live feed from the International Space Station. It's your choice. But that's the thing is we've got to be smarter about this. And in fact, a lot of the things we got to be smart about is how people can twist a fact. So, I know David Jolly, I've met him. He actually said that 25% of the national debt was caused by Trump. And he said this in 2023. And somebody turned it into this cute meme and was running it around on the internet. Now, I looked at that and I went, this has kind of been taken out of context. So, sure enough, when you look at the context, this is what you get. Yes, Biden ran up over 8 trillion. Trump ran up over 8 trillion. They did it in 4 years. Obama ran up over 8 trillion in 8 years, and Bush did 6 trillion. When you look at the numbers and add them up, 50% of the debt is Republican and 50% of the debt is Democrat. Again, when you look at something simple, that's one simple slide saying Trump ran up 25%, it's simple but wrong. When the complex but right answer is the Democrats and the Republicans have both contributed to getting us in this hole of debt. So, the biggest point I'll make for you, and this is the whole reason why I'm working with the Texas Forward Party, is we have a lack of moderates and centrists in Congress, and not only in Congress, but in the Texas legislature. So this article was written in 1996, and it talked about how the moderates had dropped from 30% to 10%, and it caused it the incredible shrinking middle. Well, fast forward to 2023, and they're now talking about the extinction of the moderates. And that's the problem we have is we don't have any moderates. So I'll leave you with these two quotes. The Baron de Montesquieu was a judge and political philosopher in France who wrote during in the 1750s. He influenced the founding fathers. He's one of the people that influenced how the Constitution is written. And he said, political liberty is to be found only in moderate governments. 2 years ago, I wrote the following line, which is a victory by a progressive urban faction or a conservative rural faction will not save America, but only increase the risk of our democracy. Our path out of this crisis does not exist in the hate or anger or in one side winning. It exists in having discussions between all Americans and finding solutions. And thank you very much. We'll open it up for questions now. Oh, where's the chat?
Y'all are free to unmute and shout out a question or put it in the chat.
Yeah, we've got a couple in the chat. Let me take those. Rick's asked, doesn't most of the money we send to Ukraine actually go to U.S. arms manufacturers? That is correct, but we do send some money for economics assistance to them. And that's the only question up there. So anybody want to go ahead and ask?
Hey, Rick, in your calculations here, like Europe has a mandatory requirement that in 2030 they're going to get rid of all gas driven cars and go to electric. The rest of the world is going much more strong towards electric vehicles and towards alternate energy. So there's going to be a lot of demand that's going to be off the table, which should drive the oil prices down because there is not that much demand.
Well, but
So, hey,
yeah, I see your point. The problem is if you drive the price down, the drillers pull back. We saw that with last year when natural gas prices were $2. They were dropping gas drilling rigs like crazy. Um, I don't know where it's going to go. There has been the EIA and the International Energy Agency are both predicting that hydrocarbon demand will go up this year. So, Rick, I'm not sure where we're going to go with that. My concern is really looking at the Permian and the Marcellus, the Utica, the Eagle Ford Shale, the Bakken. Bakken and Eagle Ford Shale have peaked already. They've peaked in oil production. They're coming down. The Permian, I was thinking 4 to 8 years. I ran into an old boss who's now high-level executive at a mid-sized oil company, and he told me 3 years at a Christmas party, and that shocked me. So I think we're going to have to look at something happening with the Permian pretty soon.
okay, thanks.
No problem.
First, I'd like to say that this is a tremendous amount of work.
3 years
And
of my
I
life,
really
Gary.
appreciate your point of view. I do agree with practically almost everything you put up. I myself also in oil and gas and have similar thoughts.
Yep.
One of the problems that I found was that both sides, the people that are pro climate change and against climate change, they actually cannot accept the fact that, say, humanity is the cause of a climate change, or it is solar activity, for example, right? What they're missing is the fact that there is a change, and the change is impacting our lives, regardless of who is the cause. And that the humanity need to start taking steps to protect itself against the cause. First of all, as you pointed out, in a root cause analysis, which I used to be in nuclear as well,
Hmm.
first you have to find the problem, then you have to fix the problem, then you have to determine the root cause of the problem, and then you have to put a preventive action. So that is basically the steps, and we are not putting any preventive action. We're just arguing about who's right and who's wrong.
Yeah. Yep. One of the things I mentioned in my book is I talk about how, as I started as an engineer, I was doing deep water Gulf of Mexico projects. And there were standards that said how high the deck of the platform had to be off the water level. And in early 2000s, we had Katrina, Rita, we had a number of Ivan, we had a number of hurricanes come through, and that standard was changed, and the deck level was required to be 10 feet higher. And you had oil and gas people going out and they were cutting the legs of their platforms and jacking them up and welding in new sections. And they were doing it for one reason. The platform had a lot of life left. They had a lot of oil to produce, and the only way to protect that platform from these big giant hurricane waves was to raise the platform. So, I mean, you ask if climate change is impacting us. If people in the oil industry don't realize it, it already has impacted us. We've now seeing these higher standards that were required for these deep water platforms because we're now realizing the waves are huge out there. But yeah,
Bill,
we're
based
seeing
on
it.
the Bill, if I may ask,
Go
based
ahead.
on since you have done a tremendous amount of work here, which is incredible and very valuable, how do we turn this into political power for Forward Party?
Rick, everything I found, so the Texas Realtors invited me to their winter meeting, and I found there was a huge group of people who are agreeing with this idea of they want middle ground solutions. They don't want the far right, they don't want the far left, they want something in the middle. And we're seeing that. And the thing is, we need to get out in front of people and say, if you're tired of the Republicans and you're tired of the Democrats, we have an answer for you. And I think that's the thing we got to do. We just got to go out and talk to your neighbor, talk to the guy at the coffee shop, talk to the people at work. Just mention, hey, I'm working with these forward people, and it's looking really good because I think people are getting really tired of it. Um,
Well, you know the headline like "Man bites dog"
exactly.
gets attention.
Right.
So,
But
do you
that's
have
yeah.
some sort of in your wisdom and in your tremendous amount of wealth of knowledge?
It was the
Do you
thing that
have one sort of
yeah.
one-liner or a two-liner which
The
can say, "Hey, we are at the precipice of finishing, uh, the gas prices as we know," or some sort of a
I don't think it's a question of talking about the precipice, Rick. I think it's a talking about this middle ground and getting people to realize it's okay for the be on the middle ground. When I presented that, hey, we're not burning the planet down, the realtors gave me a round of applause. They were like, because that's what they want to hear. Look at what our children are doing. They're freaking out over the environment. We got these kids going in and throwing stuff on art displays and gluing themselves to the road because they think the planet's burning down. And we should tell them, look, we're not burning the planet down. We do need to be worried. We do need to do these things to pull us out of this nosedive and get us back into a good place. And that's the story I think we need to work on. Um, yeah, but
And
I don't think there's like this one extreme thing that'll get
yeah,
people going.
exactly. And I think I think there's a very large community of people out there who are represented by the folks on this call who are not looking for the man bites dog, the one thing that gets them excited and gets them engaged. That's kind of the extremes at this point. And what we have to do is build a community for those people who are not attracted by that kind of thing. And William, I want to direct you to there's some good questions coming in on the chat. The first one was
Oh, I
from
miss, yeah,
Jessica C, which is what is
yeah.
an example of your findings that changed your original point of view?
I'll give y'all one answer on that one. It was guns. I went into guns thinking, oh my God, we got to confiscate all the guns. And I realized once I got into it, I went, oh my God, it's a little bitty percentage of the guns that are causing the problem. And confiscating them is the absolute wrong answer. I make the joke where I say, in Texas, you can't talk about confiscating the guns because you'll never get elected. And you just got to look at Beto O'Rourke. I mean, Beto's a nice guy and all that, but he couldn't be elected statewide dog catcher after the comment he made during the 2020 election, during the 2020 presidential run-up. Guns actually really woke me up to the fact of the story from both sides is wrong. Um, Another one was digging into the Social Security, the taxes, and everything. And I'm looking at all this data going, this is, both parties have run up the debt. So that was my view. That was what really changed my mind and what made me realize that neither party has the right story of the Republicans and Democrats. Let's see the next one. Energy demand. One factor is oversized or upsized HVAC put in home construction today, considered to saving some of the heat coils. Yeah, heat pumps are better about that. The geothermal heat pump system is, if you've got the money to put in up front on the house, that's the way to go. It's super efficient. They're installing it way up in the north. Uh, do you have information on data regarding energy efficient more locally? No, I don't. Energy efficiency will become more important for sure. Um, the big problem we have now is most new homes are built with high levels of efficiency. It's the old homes, which tend to be the homes for the poor and for the middle class, that are the issue. And how do we get those fixed? I do look at that in my chapter. Energy is often lost in transit. Are we talking about transit mobility, or are we talking about transfer of energy? When you transfer energy, you do have issues. You don't always get.
Yeah, transfer of energy is what I
Yeah.
was.
So when you look at, so the pump storage is 80% round trip efficient. So you put 100 megawatt hours in, you get 80 megawatt hours back. That's how these storage systems work. But because of the variability of the renewables, you need a storage system. Now, lithium ion batteries are great. They start off at about 93% round trip efficiency, but they degrade over time and they fall below that 80% threshold. There's a lot of other energy storage systems on the markets that are coming out. I modeled the grid using a pump storage type of energy storage and what's called a seasonal storage, which I use the Forum iron air batteries, which have got like 40% round trip efficiency, but they have 100 hours of storage. So a way to move energy from the spring to the summer and from the fall to the winter is going to be needed. And I was using that technology. But I was trying to figure out if you could make an ERCOT with only nuclear, wind, and solar without any natural gas and fossil. And I was able to make it work. I was able to balance the whole grid, which I thought was cool. But yeah, so we do need to be looking at storage, but I don't think we need to be picking the technology. We need to, in the book, what I talk about is change the market to encourage long duration energy storage and then let the market figure out what the best solution is.
So driven by capitalism
Yes.
versus now, are there minimum requirements? Like, has government set minimum requirements regarding these things, and do they change or
And no, and the problem we have is, especially if we look at ERCOT, ERCOT is market driven. We're looking at our feet. Nobody's taking that 20-year view of what do we need. And you can look at it by the fact of we just passed this Texas Energy Fund to spend $10 billion to build more natural gas power plants when we're building more LNG facilities, when we have no idea where the more natural gas is going to come from. There's a article where they presented the information of the doubling of the LNG export capacity to some natural gas producer CEOs. And one CEO turns to the other guy and he goes, I don't know where that's coming from. And that to me was like a moment where it's like, these guys don't
they're
know.
not communicating?
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you look at the real estate market, you'll see where you get these they overbuild the houses in one area thinking they're going to, this factory is going to open or something. The factory never opens and you create a housing bubble and it bursts. I think we're going to see that with the natural gas. The
Is-
data center demand and
When it-
everything is going to push it.
So when it comes to like a city having a comprehensive plan for growth, would it benefit?
But look at Conroe. Conroe just had to stop all new buildings because they don't have enough water. We're
Okay.
pushing our infrastructure and we're going to be pushing the electrical grid as well. And I think we got to figure out that. Okay, Isaiah had a question on nuclear. Let me read it. Yeah, it also is about some sort of energy reserve. Oh, yeah, that's storage. Yeah, that's energy storage. Um, Mark Rubin goes, highly unlikely the proposed LNG will actually be built. Yeah, what was the company? I'm trying to remember this LNG company. They could be going bust and because they're in trouble. I think we are going to see something. I think the next few plants will get built and then it could get ugly. Social media. Yeah, we got to work on social media. Who is this GS? Oh, Greg Schultz. Okay. Yeah. Social media is, I think, something that's got to be done. I've got a whole chapter on social media and then another chapter on fake news where I say, okay, you've got to hold the news companies to account. And how do we do that? So there's a chapter on that in the book as well. The book is available on my website if you want to, fixingamericathebook.com, if you want to get a signed copy from me, or it's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Um, the Substack link should be up. You can see that. I write on the Substack. The ERCOT data in the slides is not in the book, but it is on the Substack. So local Texas stuff is on the Substack. The book was more written as a national thing. And that's about it. Was there any other questions I didn't hit? Yeah.
Nothing in the chat and
We
no
got it
hands
covered.
up.
Okay. Oh, that's what.
All right. I want to thank it, William. I want to thank you, first of all. Most of all, I want to thank everybody for participating this evening. Again, my view is that, there's a big question out there. How do we get stuff like this to actually manifest itself in public policy? And that all comes down to building a community that is cohesive and becomes politically powerful enough to vote people into office. Now, I at the last statewide forward party meeting, I used the example of Donald Trump as a guy who has built a community of people, regardless of whether you agree with what they've organized around, the concepts they've organized around, what it is they feel that they're all have in common. You don't have to agree with that. It is a cohesive community that is exerting political power that is disproportionate to their numbers. And we have to build a similar community who is going to exert political power to force policy positions such as the data that William presents are driven by rational data, similar to what William presents here. So that's what we're trying to do here in Texas, and what we're trying to do in the Forward Party, both here in Texas and nationally. And I hope this helps you see the vision of what we're trying to build here.
So one follow-up on that. If you want to know what you can do, the first thing you can do is go to texasforwardparty.org. There's a web page, part of the web page that says about we're going to do a ballot access drive. We're going to get on the ballot. Sign up for that. Then volunteer to be, so the way Texas works is you have precinct chairs, a chairperson who runs the precinct, the voting precinct. And the first thing we will do is hold a convention. Each precinct chair will hold a convention at their house or at a location, and they will get people to participate during the primary season in 2026. That's how we get people to help us reach to get on the ballot. So talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, and sign up to be a precinct chair. That's the key building block we need right now.
100%.
Okay. Wish y'all a good night. Thank y'all very much. The website Fixing America Book has a contact point. You can reach me through there. Ask me any further questions you want to follow up on. Thank y'all very much.
Thanks, William. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.